So there's some inaccuracy in the two columns on the right side. Okay, the association that you're seeing, rafa reflected with dhamma, nasab reflected with fatha, and jar reflected with kasra, this is true the majority of the time. The second association you're seeing on the slide right now is rafa is associated to subject, nasab is associated to object, and jar is possessive. So you can see they're lined up together. Okay, so what we're going to tell you in this presentation, you see, I'm not going to hold back on this topic. I'm going to tell you right now that rafa does not mean subject, nasab does not mean object, and jar does not mean possessive. Okay, in other words, they don't equal each other. But instead, subject is an example of rafa, object is an example of nasab, and jar is an example of possessive. Okay, why do I say that? I say that because if you restrict rafa, nasab, and jar to subject, object, possessive, then essentially what you're claiming is that the ism could be used in three total ways. The ism could only be used in three ways. One of them is called rafa, the other one's called nasab, the third one's called jar, subject, object, possessive, but that can't be true. That can't be true. Let me tell you why. Because subject here is in the meaning of doer. And remember that distinction also from last week, that when I use the word subject, sometimes I mean subject as opposed to predicate, in other words mubtada, and other times I mean subject as opposed to doer of a verb. Okay, and that's the meaning intended here on the slide. Okay, so subject, object, both of those presuppose that there's a verb. You're not going to have a doer of a verb unless you have a verb. You're not going to have an object unless you have a verb. So both of those, subject and object, presuppose that there's a verb, and we already told you last week that there's many sentences that don't even have verbs. So what are you going to have? You're not going to have subject and object. You're going to have something other than these two. You're going to have mubtada and khabar. Mubtada is other than subject, object, possessive. Khabar is other than subject, object, possessive. So we're already at 5. We're already at 5 possible usages for the ism. So the number is much larger than 3. Okay? So this is the topic of the presentation. Okay, so we start off with 3. Okay, and this was the analogy. This was the first introduction of the topic, your first exposure at this topic through the analogy. Okay, it gave the impression that the ism could be used in 3 ways. So let's list those 3 first, and then we'll give you some idea of how the number is much larger. So subject as in doer of the verb. That's one possible usage for an ism. Zaid went. Okay, object, Zaid hit Amr. So that Amr word there at the end is an ism and is being used as an object. Very clear. Possessive is like Zaid's book. The second word, Zaid, is being used as part of a possessive phrase. Other than that, we have the Jumla Ismiya. Don't forget the Jumla Ismiya. The two halves of the Jumla Ismiya can be considered a possible usage number 4 and a possible usage number 5. So we have the subject of the nominal sentence is a fourth usage for the ism. The predicate of the nominal sentence is a 5th usage for the ism. It's other than the initial 3. Okay? And then coming after a preposition, it would be an ism that comes after the preposition, like with the pen, or in the house, or to the masjid, or on the roof. Okay? Or whatever, like many examples can be given. And prepositions are always coupled with isms. So coming after a preposition can be considered a 6th possible usage for an ism. And then we have numerous types of adverbs. And this is specific to verbal sentences. In a verbal sentence, the bare minimum is the fi'l and the fa'il. Like you can't have a verbal sentence unless you have those 2 words. But then it doesn't need to stop there, because depending on the meaning of the verb, you can also have an object. Some verbs won't have that. Like sitting and standing does not have an object. Zaid stood, the meaning is complete. Zaid sat, the meaning is complete. But hitting and helping, you would expect there to be a 3rd word in the sentence, and that 3rd word is an object. Okay, but beyond that, depending on relevance, the speaker might choose to express further details of the event. Okay, he might want to speak about when the event occurred. So today, Zaid hit Amr today. So the word today is an additional word, so it's caused the sentence to become larger. And we're going to call that an adverb of time. Okay, and also it could be the answer to the question where. So when, where, how, why. Okay, so when, where, how, why are details of the verb that if they're relevant, the speaker might want to express them. So the question is, how would the speaker do that? The speaker would do that by bringing isms, because an ism not only includes noun and pronoun, but it also includes adverb. Remember that? And this entire presentation is about the possible uses of the ism. You see that? So add that on, and our number becomes even larger. It's now closer to 10, because there's already like 6 on the board after a preposition is the sixth one, and then we have these numerous types of adverbs that will cause our number to reach 10. So the question is, what's the grand total? How many possible ways can an ism be used in a sentence? And the answer is 22. 22 possible usages for the ism. And let me tell you, the 132-page best book in the world for grammar, 1/3 of that book is devoted to developing these 22 places. 1/3. So what we are giving you in this presentation is 1/3 of all of grammar. It's extremely dense. This is an important presentation, and it's one of those that you would want to watch again and again. And don't worry if it's still abstract. Okay, I'm going to give you examples for each one, inshallah, the ones that I develop. But then if you want more examples, then you don't have to wait long, because within week 3 itself, we're going to begin the stories of the Prophet's book, and then you're going to see more examples than you can handle, inshallah, when that book begins. Okay, let's continue. Okay, so first of all, why is that number so large? Okay, why 22? So let's give you some idea of why it's so large. Because the ism is very broad. Not only does it include nouns and pronouns, but it also includes adjectives and adverbs. And the way an adverb occurs within a sentence is radically different than how a noun occurs. Okay, and you probably can appreciate that, because what is a noun? A noun is an entity. Okay, and a noun has the capacity to become a doer of a verb. Like Zayd's a noun, Amr is a noun. And nouns have the capacity to become object. Nouns have the capacity to become mubtada, the primary portion of a nominal sentence. It must be an entity. Now, a pronoun is very similar to a noun. It's just a smaller version of it. So instead of Zayd came, it says he came, or I hid him. So there's not much discussion there about nouns and pronouns. The adjective's usage is radically different, because the adjective would become predicate. For example, Zayd is tall. Or you can use it as part of a phrase to modify a noun, or you can use it as a description, sentence level, phrase level. Adverbs are brought in verbal sentences to modify the verb. And this would be the answer to the question when, where, how, and why. So keep in mind that it's the ism doing all of this. That's the whole point. The whole point of the presentation is that it's the ism conveying all of these meanings. So obviously the number is going to be large based on the broadness of the ism itself. Second factor, okay, notice that the grammar people took the generic terms subject and predicate, and they came up with 4 more specific terms based on the kind of sentence you're dealing with. So that we have specific terminology for each kind of sentence. The portions of the verbal sentence are labeled differently, and the portions of the nominal sentence are labeled differently. All of those labels is what we're going to talk about today. You see that? So this is another factor that causes our number to become large. The fact that we have 2 kinds of sentences, and the portions of each of these 2 kinds of sentences have different labels. Okay, now let's get a little more specific now. First of all, in a verbal sentence, you're going to have a subject. Obviously, like without that, you can't have a verbal sentence, and that would be the fa'il, what we call fa'il, and that's the who. Okay? Okay, many verbs also have an object. Not every verb. Sitting and standing won't have an object, but hitting and helping would. Okay, so just follow with this. I'm listing a whole bunch of them, and I'm going to try to get to a large number, and then I'm going to tie it all up together, inshallah, and I'll distribute them on rafa, nasab, and jar. Because the whole point is that rafa does not mean subject, nasab does not mean object, and jar does not mean possessive, but rather subject is an example of rafa, and there's more. Nasab is an example, object is an example of nasab, and there's more than that. Okay, because the total number we're dealing with is 22. And those 22 need to be distributed on rafa, nasab, and jar. Okay, so back to the verbal sentence. So at the very front of the sentence will be the verb, and that's not part of the discussion. We're not talking about the verb. We're talking about what follows the verb. So the first thing you'd expect there to be after the verb would be the who, the doer. We call that subject. Second, for many verbs, you'd also have an object, so that's another noun added to the sentence. We're at 3 words now, verb plus 2 nouns. Apart from that, verbs could be passive. And when a verb is passive, what that means is that the doer is suppressed, there's no doer anymore, and instead the object occupies the place of the doer, and now it's the subject of the sentence in the sense that it is musnad ilayh. It's what's being talked about. The example is Zayd ate an apple. That's a normal sentence where apple is object. But if you take away Zayd, then it becomes the apple was eaten. Notice the ending. The ending on the word apple on the left side is fatha. So if they ask you what state is the word apple in, the answer is nasab. It's like I entered the house. It's an example of object. But in the other example, this same object becomes primary. Okay, because Zayd's missing, right? So something has to replace Zayd, so the apple replaces Zayd, and now all of the focus is on the apple. The apple was eaten, and the ending changed. So we're going to consider that an additional usage for the ism, and we're going to give it a name. Let's call it deputy doer. Okay, because the real doer is gone. So now what was previously object occupies the place of the subject, and the name changes. We don't call it fa'il anymore. We call it na'ib fa'il. Na'ib means deputy. Na'ib fa'il, deputy doer. Okay, so we have fa'il, we have maf'ul bihi. Okay, that was a little premature because I haven't given you the term maf'ul bihi anyway. It's going to come later on the upcoming slides. Object. Third is the deputy doer. Okay, so those are three possible usages for the ism because it's the ism that will be those three things. The who, the what, and the deputy doer. Other than that, we can have different kinds of adverbs which I've already alluded to. When, where, how, why. Okay, so those adverbs are now here on the screen, 4 of them. If it's generic, without any time connotation, without any place connotation, reason, cause, why, how, none of that, just modifying the muster meaning within the verb. In other words, the action component of the verb. I became very happy, I became extremely happy. So that's a possible usage. Okay, so it has a name which we'll give to you as we move forward with the presentation.